All right, for those who don't know me, my name is Linda Gorski, and I'm president of the Houston Archeological Society. Thanks to all of you, we are the largest regional archaeological society in the state of Texas, and our goal is to foster enthusiastic interest and active participation in the discovery, documentation, and preservation of cultural resources, both prehistoric and historic, in the city of Houston, the Houston metropolitan area, and the Upper Gulf Coast region. We meet on the third Thursday of every month, normally at Trinity Mendenhall Community Center in Spring Branch, although during the COVID pandemic, we have resorted to these Zoom meetings. Each month, we host speakers who educate us on a variety of historical and archaeological topics, and this month is no exception. Our speaker tonight is Wilson W. "Dub" Crook, who will present a program on a major project that members of the Houston Archeological Society have undertaken for the past 3 years at the Sam Houston Regional Library and Research Center in Liberty, Texas. This project has literally rewritten the archaeological record of that part of East Texas. Dub is a lifetime member of the Houston Archeological Society, a life member of the Dallas Archeological Society, a member of the Texas Archeological Society and the Center for the Study of the First Americans. He's also a life member of the Galt School of Archaeological Research and a research fellow with the Texas Archaeological Research Laboratory in Austin and a fellow of the Leakey Foundation. He is also a Texas Historical Commission archaeological steward, but most important to me, Dub is the editor of the fantastic journals and reports that each of you receive as a benefit of your membership in HAS. I give you Dub Crook.
All right, let's see if this works. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, Linda's already told you, we have been working, a lot of us, and you can see the pictures of all the members who have been working at the Sam Houston Regional Library over the last 3 years. Most of you have seen reports that have come out of this variously. It all started in 2017 when the library asked through the Texas Historical Commission if somebody would help them prepare a new exhibit using the Andy Kyle Archeological Collection. This is an extensive collection of well over 50,000 artifacts that was given to the center by the late Andy Kyle, a local Liberty man who collected there. He moved to Liberty after World War II, and from 1946 to 1986 made extensive collection and then donated it toward the end of his life to the center. Unfortunately, it sat there basically with nothing happening for a long period of time, and we came in 2017, and over the last 3 years have been taking it apart, literally sherd by sherd, and researching it. It's a group of 90 collections from 95 archaeological sites over 9 Southeast Texas counties. And it ranges from the earliest Paleoindian of Clovis at one site all the way through to the late prehistoric. Now, what we have found over the last 3 years is that 3 sites in particular, the Savoy Site, the Wood Spring Site, and the Moss Hill Site, are the largest in terms of numbers. And you can see there that the 3 of those sites, they comprise about 27,000 artifacts, just those 3. They also, as I have been working through it, it became obvious to me that they had a lot of items that really weren't native to Southeast Texas. And so I began doing some research on these, and that's more or less what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. One thing I would preface it with is, historically, the archaeology of Southeast Texas has always said that it was a bit of a backwater in the state of Texas and really was isolated and didn't have much connections to the rest of the region. And I think what you'll see tonight is that was greatly mistaken, and that we have found that at least these 3 sites had huge connections with a vast network. All right, here's the late Andy Kyle on the left, our lovely co-worker with all of this that made it possible, the director, Alana Inman, who is on tonight. And on the right-hand side, you can see the map of Southeast Texas with the orange counties being the 9 that are represented in the Andy Kyle collection. The 3 major sites that I'll be talking about tonight are those 3 black stars, and you can see their approximate location there in Liberty County. All right, you know, one day I was looking at Google Earth on trying to look at some features of old cutoffs of the Trinity River for the Wood Springs site. And, you know, only about 4/10 of a mile away is the center. So I just kind of on a whim scrolled over to see what the aerial view of the regional library and center would be. And lo and behold, there is the satellite took a picture of my Honda Accord. And it began to dawn on me, I've probably been there too much if I'm there so often that the satellite caught me. But nonetheless, it has been a wonderful labor of love, meeting all the wonderful people there and throughout all of Liberty County as well over these last 3 years. All right, let's look at the 3 sites before we get to the artifacts. The first one is Wood Springs. And you can see from that picture, it looks a little bit like Vietnam. You know, it's full of undergrowth and lush things. And that's Wood Springs Creek right there that while I have been there, I have actually scared 2 alligators off into that creek. So it's got live animals in it. The location of it, as you can see, the white area is the outline of Liberty County, and the county seat of Liberty is here. And you can see that Wood Springs is just about 3 miles north of Liberty, and it is very close to the center, which is kind of unique because it does have artifacts that go back to Clovis 13,000 years ago. And to think that over 13,000 those artifacts migrated all of 4/10 of a mile and are curated and on display at the library. This is what the site looks like. There's a north-south road that transects the site. There's a pipeline that transects it east to west. This little bridge, I don't know if you can see that there where I'm pointing, but that goes over Wood Springs Creek. And to build that bridge up from the creek level, they took a huge amount of dirt out of this area here, which is known as the Marshall Pit, named for one of the landowners that owns part of the site. Now, the site is on both the north side of the bridge as well as on the south side. Most of the artifacts that we have found have been in this area, and from Andy Kyle's notes, that appears where they are. Off to the right over here is one little sandy terrace that sits above everywhere else, and that looks to us to be the one place at the site that might have undisturbed sediments. And unfortunately, Mr. Marshall, who owns that land, it's 1.05 acres. We have approached him, and he is really not, he is very opposed to having any archaeological excavations come in, even though we promised that we would fill it all back in and restore it exactly the way it was. So far, he has not let us on that property. Okay, the Savoy Site is north of here in central Liberty County. This is County Road 2099. It hooks around the corner like this, and it bisects the site. And on the south side of the road here is part of the site, and on the rest of it is over here on the northern part of the site. You can see where it's located. It's about 2 miles southeast of the little community of Moss Hill. It sits in a very rural environment. It's on a low terrace above Knight's Bayou, which is a minor tributary of the Trinity River. And the Trinity is this thing that flows like this through Liberty County north to south. Here's what it looks like. The northern side of it, which is owned by the Savoy family, is the green pasture that you see on the left. It's basic pasture land for horses, and it's not cultivated, and so it's no longer really it got any exposures. But the southern side of it, which at one time was owned by a Mr. Stone, and his property has now been subdivided amongst 4 owners. But on Andy Kyle's notes, he calls it the stone field of the Savoy Site. And you can see they still plow that field. And every time they plow that field, of course, artifacts are exposed, one of which I will talk about in a little while. Okay, the Moss Hill site. Moss Hill sits north of the Savoy site. It's about a mile north of the little community there of Moss Hill. It sits on a terrace above the Trinity River, but it's a very low terrace, and when the Trinity floods, it floods close to where the site is. And as you can see by my notes there, it's about 2.5 miles north of Savoy that we just talked about. This is what it looks like. The site itself is this area back over here by the woods, and when you walk out there, this is where most of the site area is. It's on several acres of land, most of which is basically fallow now. They run a few cattle on it, but it's not like it was back during Andy Kyle's day when it was being plowed and you could see artifacts. All right. Oh, and this is the Trinity River near Moss Hill. You can see the day I was there and took this photograph, the river was very low, but this whole sandbar that's here, when it floods, this whole area floods, and back toward the site, which is this direction, almost a mile, it will flood parts of the lowland there. All right, now let's look at the trade items that are present in the site. Now, in terms of exotic items, there, of course, are many of the paleo points, as well as the early archaic, are made from cherts that are not native to the area. In fact, almost all of those points, both periods, are made out of Edwards chert. And I have not included photographs of them because they themselves are type forms that can be found all over the place. It's just that the material they're made from was imported into the site. However, forms that are not native to the area, the collection has a number of these unusual double-notched Evans points. Evans points are more common in western Louisiana and slightly into East Texas. They're very distinctive with that double notch in there. And there's probably close to 100 of these in the Andy Kyle collection. The other thing that's interesting is of the arrow points, the Alba points, Catahoula, and Perdiz points are all very typical of Texas. But these guys with the upturned barbs, one of the only arrow points in all of North America that has upturned barbs like that are Friley points. And Friley points are also Western Louisiana points. So what this shows is that the Sabine River was not much of an impediment, and that there was consistent travel and trade coming back and forth from Western Louisiana to Southeast Texas. We also get a few interesting points that come from a longer distance away. This is an Adena Point, which is really a Mississippi Valley type point. And it's made of an unusual white chert that, the best I can tell, looks very similar to something like Burlington chert that may have come from Missouri. You can see it was heat treated because you see this little pinkish area down here on the contracting stem from it. But that's a pretty classic looking Adena Point, which really shouldn't be in Texas, but we're beginning to find more of them. As a matter of fact, Jason Barrett, who's on tonight, has identified these points from Diamond Knoll and I think some other sites in Southeast Texas too, probably coming along and being imported from the same type of source that was contributing to this one being at the Savoy site. All right. Unusual artifacts. These are banner stones. They are not from the Andy Kyle collection. I'm just showing you what a banner stone looks like. They are either these wing-shaped artifacts or these ones that are kind of diamond-shaped. the characteristic is they have a central perforation drill through them. And we don't really know what they were used for. The most commonly thought use was as a weight on a atlatl throwing stick, but that's never been proven. If you were here a couple of years ago, our own Gus Costa gave us a presentation on these, and he has helped me with my study on this because in the Andy Kyle collection, we have these two. They are both broken, so they're a little more difficult to see. This one, the central perforation is through here, so it would have been a wing shaped like this. This one, the central perforation was here, and it would have come like that. This one is interesting because not only did it break through the central perforation, but then once it did, they tried to rehabilitate it, if you will, and they tried another perforation coming through here, and the banded slate it's made from split. And so they just threw that part away. The interesting feature here is not only are bannerstones fairly rare in Texas. I mean, Gus has only been able to run down probably something on the order of about 50 of these reported from around the state. But the material these two are made of are clearly not native to Texas. The one on the left is a gabbro material that's been metamorphosed, and the closest area that would have had this is the Ouachitas, either in eastern Oklahoma or western Arkansas. The banded slate is almost identical to a large paleo or prehistoric quarry of banded slate that exists in southeastern Oklahoma. So both of these are probably created a good distance away and then by trade found their way into the Savoy site. Now at the Wood Springs site, we have one of these that appears to have originally been a diamond shaped one. It would have come over like this with the central perforation, which you can see here. And you'll note the color of the material. Well, being my degrees are actually in mineralogy and crystal chemistry, and so I actually got to use some mineralogy again. And when I looked at this under the microscope, it's composed of the minerals primarily actinolite, albite, which is a plagioclase mineral, rock-forming mineral, epidote, and chlorite. These are common to a type of rock called a greenstone. There are no greenstones in the state of Texas. In fact, there occur usually up in very old folded mountain belts up in the northern part of the country, or the composition of this one is identical to the composition of the Hillaby Greenstone complex that occurs in the state of Alabama. And you can see in this map, it's this little line here that you can see over here. And most of the artifacts that are made out of the few banner stones, some boat stones, but most of the celts that are found at Moundville and some of the other complexes in the lower Mississippi Valley are made from this Hillaby greenstone. And while I can't absolutely prove it, I am pretty confident that this was somehow imported all the way from the southeastern US into the Wood Springs site. All right, we also have one boat stone. Boat stones are kind of these unique things. This one's broken in half, so it would have been completed over like this. They are rounded, polished stone, ground stone material that are hollowed out so that they have a little boat type shape. We really don't have much of an idea of what they were used for. Again, there's a number of theories, but they have never been proven. The interesting thing about this one is it's made from limestone, but when you look close up under the microscope, the microfossils that are present in it, and I was helped here by some of my former colleagues in ExxonMobil who know paleontology a lot better than I do. They looked at the microfossils, and this is coming from a Paleozoic limestone, so something back beyond 250 million years ago, probably like Ordovician in age. And we don't have limestones like this in Texas, but in southern Oklahoma near Ardmore and those areas, they commonly occur. And so this thing too was formed somewhere probably out of state and made its way to Southeast Texas. One interesting artifact that is from the Savoy Site, and I actually have a paper on this artifact coming out at the journal at the end of this year. This is a little heavy weighted ceramic artifact, cone shaped, as you can see, with a central perforation. If you can see that little hole here, and it comes through, this is the cone, which is recessed, and you can see that little perforation. Well, my first thought is, could it possibly be a pipe? But the hole is so small that it wouldn't draw at all. You know, Aaron thought that Aaron Phillips thought it might be an ornament. I didn't really know. So I put it out in the newsletter of the Texas Archaeological Research Laboratory asking for, you know, can you help on identifying it? Interestingly enough, Dr. Sharon Bramlett at UT responded to me. She is an expert on paleo weaving and cloth. And she says she has seen made out of clay, both in North America, but especially even in ancient Greece, warp weights used on a loom that were identical to this, even with the recessed cone and everything. Now, a warp weight is what holds the threads in the vertical position while the shuttle works left and right to weave the cloth. If this is indeed a warp weight, unproven, but if it is, obviously that's an indication that possibly weaving was taking place in clothing manufacture through weaving at the Savoy Site as well. So it's an interesting, unique thing. I've never seen anything like this in my some 40 plus years of working Texas archaeology. Okay, in the collections from the Savoy Site, there was a big sack that was labeled on it in marks a lot that said one spot. And when we opened it up, it contained 58 sherds of a very fine grained sand and grog tempered ceramic that had very interesting stamping designs on it. And it was the devil to put together because it did not, because of the sand content in it, it did not break in clean breaks, but it broke and then weathered so that the edges of every sherd looked like a little ridge. So in trying to put it together, the surface area that the glue could hold it together is pretty minimal. But I got two sections refitted, and they come together in one about ½ inch part. And I held it in two hands long enough before it fell apart again for my wife to put a estimate across that the diameter, the outside diameter of the bowl, it's a bowl, would have been about 12 inches. Now, I had never seen stamping in that kind of design, so I put it out to all my experts, and they came back with a conclusion, which we have subsequently proven, that is a rare type of pottery from the lower Mississippi Valley known as Mabin Stamped variety Joe's Bayou. It's a very early woodland period ceramic, right around time of Christ to about 200 AD, previously known from only 5 sites, 3 in Mississippi and 2 in Louisiana. So it really represents a long distance trade item. Now inside the sack, Andy was not much on writing notes, but he was very good on taking 3x5 cards and drawing maps of where things were found. And what he said in his little notes is that came on the stone side, the south side of the Savoy Site, right next to these trees. And that's where he found the sherds. This is the reconstruction of one of them. You can't tell here for sure, but I'll show you details. There's stamping that outlines these clear areas where the figures are. This is the other piece, and right here, this little stretch right here is where the two pieces connect. And you can see the fire modeling on it. This was, even though it was an exotic trade item, this was used as an everyday serving or cooking ware. you can see up by the rim, they had took cord and made this all the way around the rim. And then below it, you can see this stamping, which was done either with a bone or a wooden tool. And they just stamped it. And when they worked it all the way around, this is what you got. Now, HAS member, Dr. Claudia Penate from Italy, she came out to my house for over a week, every day working on this carefully because I couldn't move the bowl. It would fall apart. And she carefully drew this in, and you can see the presence of all the stamping, how they outline these kind of maybe like bird-like type features. The lower Mississippi Valley pottery has a lot of these very stylistic type bird-like images, motifs, and that may or may not be what that is, but that's what the design actually looks like. And here you see a map. The Mississippi Valley is up through here. These are the 3 sites where Mabin Stamped variety Joe's Bayou were found in these 3 sites. And then over here, these 2 sites on the Louisiana side, but 350 miles away, here's the Savoy Site. So these, it's interesting. These were not, there is virtually no sand in this area, such that the pottery itself is all grog with little to no sand. The bowl that we have from the Savoy Site has some sand mixed into it. So probably it was not made here and transported all the way, but probably somewhere in between the two, there are other known occurrences that they maybe added a little sand, and either the technology of how to make it came here, or more likely it was constructed somewhere here in Louisiana and then transported over to where the Savoy Site is. Either way, it is an incredibly unique thing. And by the way, the samples that are present from those 5 sites is typically 1 to 2 sherds. This is without a doubt the single greatest example of this type of pottery in the world that is known today. Okay, while most of the pottery in the collection is local, very crummy, sandy paste sherds of the Goose Creek series, literally tens of thousands of them, there are some examples of trade wares that come from Caddo, East Texas, purely grog tempered. There is a broken vessel of 53 sherds, again, highly weathered, so it's difficult to reconstruct, of a type known as Crockett curvilinear in size, from around 900 to 1200 AD. And we have 1 sherd of holly fine engraved from the same time period. And then from the later Caddo, we have several sherds of Maydell incised as well as Poinore engraved. Both of these other 2, the Crockett curvilinear and the holly fine, were vastly traded. They are found from the Great Plains all the way to the southeastern US. And one major production center of this type of pottery was the George C. Davis site, that's known as Caddo Mound State Park today, in Cherokee County. That's about 220 kilometers, so 130 miles or so north of Liberty County, and probably was part of this trade where instead of moving north and across, it was coming down south to Liberty County. Here are the Crockett curvilinear sherds. You probably can't see it, but it has a line underneath the rim, which is kind of everted. And then it has this unique design like this with cross hatching in between it. And that's very distinctive to Crockett curvilinear. Holly fine is actually an engraved pottery where the potter was fired and then the lines were very fine tool engraved into the hardened pottery. And you can see the fine lines that are here. Maydell incised is characterized by incised lines alternating with punctations. And we have several sherds that look just like this. It was nice that this one broke at one where you had both features. The Poinore engraved is more difficult to see. You may have to get up close to the screen to see this, but it's very fine little scroll work that's done here with lines. And we only have 2 sherds of this type of pottery in the collection. All right. When I was out in March, before we started work again in 2020 at Lone Oak, I was out taking pictures of the Savoy site to actually provide pictures for some of these papers. And while I was taking pictures there in the stone field, that south side of the site, the sunlight was shining off of an object that was reflecting. And it just was bothering me so much that what should be metal out there reflecting like that, that I decided to walk over. Well, of course, as I began to change position, the sunlight changed and I couldn't find it. And I spent about an hour searching around, and eventually I found it. And what it was is a plummet made out of specular hematite, that's iron oxide. And plummets or plumb bobs are oblong objects. They typically are fatter than this. They typically narrow and then have a more bell-shaped like this. They typically either have a perforation or a groove in the top for a fastening. What they were used for is, again, unknown. There have been thoughts that they were ornaments. There's thoughts that they were net weights. There's a more recent thought that they too may have served as loom weights, warp weights on looms for weaving. Again, we just basically don't know. But what's fascinating about this one is they almost invariably polish smooth. This one on the back side is what it should look like. But on this side, in bas relief, it has a snake carved out of it onto it. And when you look up close, here you can see the head of the snake is actually defined. I mean, you can see the eyes and definitely the arrowhead shape of probably a poisonous snake, you know, like a water moccasin. But nonetheless, a very interesting feature. Now, I discovered that just before the pandemic stopped, and I really haven't had a chance to do anything such as analyze it to try to source where the hematite is coming from. I had Jeff Gerard in Louisiana send this out to his entire connection of people who know about Poverty Point, because Poverty Point over in Louisiana is really a hotbed of finding these hematite plummets. His people came back to me saying that it didn't look like a classic Louisiana one because it was so narrow and thin. In their experience, these really thin plummets like that aren't bell-shaped are more common to Texas. So, you know, that's about as much as I know. Now, the interesting thing of sources of hematite, up in northern Texas in Wise County, there are cobbles of specular hematite that have been used to make celts. They are smaller than probably needed to produce this length of a plummet. But up in Arkansas, shown there in red of Hot Springs County, which is in the middle of the Ouachita Fold Belt, there are large pieces of specular hematite available there. And this probably is the source of where this came from, but I will not be able to know until someday the bloody pandemic lets up and labs open up and I can have access to a, you know, an XRF unit and try to match trace element chemistries. There are also a couple of interesting pieces of galena, which is the primary ore mineral of lead. It's lead sulfide that are in the collection from the Moss Hill site. If you look at this, here's the little thing. You can see the lead is here, but it's in limestone. And this is a piece of lead ore in limestone from the Tri-State Mineral District, so named because it is this area up here that circulates between northeastern Oklahoma, southeastern Kansas, and southwestern Missouri. And they are almost identical. So I am convinced that somehow galena, lead sulfide, was being imported down from that tri-state area down into southeast Texas as well. Now, probably one of the last most interesting things that's happened is I was looking at every single sherd and every single flake from the Savoy site. And one of the bags of flakes I dumped out onto my research table there at the library. And I kept hearing a couple of flakes rattling in the bag. So I dumped the bag out again and they were still rattling. Well, I looked inside the bag, and the reason they were rattling is they were trapped underneath a white envelope that was serving as like the bottom of the sack. So I took the envelope out, and first thing in it was a very yellowed 3x5 card, typically the type that Andy Kyle wrote. But interesting enough, this is the stone field you can see down here and the Savoy site up here. He's labeled it fall and winter of 1978-79, but he has a little X right here and he wrote copper. And so I looked down inside the envelope, and inside the envelope were two copper artifacts. One is a solid piece there on the left, which is shaped as either like a hairpin or an awl. The other one is a folded piece of sheet copper, which I have been told, and I will show you why, appears to be a copper projectile point of which an arrow shaft would have gone, or a dart shaft, into that socket. Now, take a look at these. And now I'm going to show you, I'll come back to that. These are ones that are found from the old copper culture, which is from the middle to our middle or late archaic, up around the Great Lakes. And look at the picture of the folded sheet arrow points, all of these in here, and they look virtually identical to that one. And then the awl on the left-hand side, you can see there are awls here as well. Now, up in the Great Lakes, there is a massive copper belt of pure native copper. It is some of the finest, richest copper deposits that were known anywhere in the world. They're kind of played out today, but they were highly prized because of their lack of contaminants that would affect electrical conductivity. But they also were heavily mined in prehistoric times. And there are a number of prehistoric mines, and these copper artifacts from their source areas can be identified based on trace element chemistry. And we have a few other copper artifacts from here in Southeast Texas that Gus Costa has put together. And we are trying, again, the problems with the labs and availability during the pandemic, but we are trying to get these artifacts along with his analyzed. And if we get the analysis back, we should be able to source these. But just based on form, I am betting that they are probably coming from the Keweenaw Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So again, think of those artifacts, if they could talk, how they got from the Great Lakes to Southeast Texas. And interestingly enough, there is another copper artifact that has been found at the Bowser site, and you can see the black and white photograph of it here on the right-hand side, but look how close it looks to the one that has been found at the Savoy site. They're almost identical in length and shape and everything. So this isn't the first one that has been here in Southeast Texas. Okay, conclusions. And no, we are not playing poker with the sherds being used as chips. Exotic trade items have been found at a number of sites in Liberty County, primarily at Wood Springs, especially at Savoy and at Moss Hill. Many of these come from somewhere to the east of Texas in the lower Mississippi Valley, maybe as far as Alabama, certainly Louisiana, and up into the upper Mississippi Valley with that copper. There's also artifacts that are coming from the north, from East Texas as Caddo tradeware, those ceramics. Now, our wonderful member, Jason Barrett, former president of the TAS, he has been working on a number of looking at maps where historic trails that occur in Southeast Texas probably extended back into the prehistoric as well. And what he has done is he has plotted a number of sites that have long-term occupations from the Paleoindian period all the way through the late prehistoric and against these trails. And what he has found is a great number of them line up against these trails. Now, the major one coming from the east is the Atascosito Road, which is this thing that comes across in here. And the site that many of you worked on and everything that Jason was the PI on was the Diamond Knoll site, which is located here. And, but there are other sites, other trails as well. There is also another major one called the Bayou Trail that runs north from about the town of Liberty up through the Big Thicket. Now, if any of you have been to the Big Thicket of East Texas, it's almost impenetrable. There's parts of it that you can't walk through without using a machete. So this trail was one of the most popular trails because it was one of the few going north-south that could get through the Big Thicket area up to where the Caddos were. All right, look at these two trails. We have the Bayou Trail coming north-south, and we have the Atascosito Road here. Wood Springs is located virtually at the confluence of these two. The Savoy Site and Moss Hill are a little bit north of that, but along the Bayou Trail and paralleling the Trinity River here, which is this river coming down. So if these historic trade routes existed in the prehistoric periods, this clearly provides an explanation of how some of these exotic trade items from long distance away from Southeast Texas, got to our area and were traded here. Now, what did the people here have to trade for? Well, the most common local tool stone in Southeast Texas is petrified wood, and nobody in his right mind would trade for that. The animal life is wild turkeys and white-tailed deer, and everybody in the U.S. has that. So probably the only exotic thing, or the only thing that these people had to trade, is potentially wives. And that was a very common trade item at trade fairs and things like that. And that might be the source of where a lot of these exotic items came in. Now, everything I've been telling you is pretty much kind of speculation. I can't prove any of that. But the one thing that is positive is this last bullet point on here, is that Southeast Texas was not the obscure backwater that wasn't connected to the rest of the prehistoric United States as once thought. And in reality, what we have found from studying the Andy Kyle collection is that clearly there were pathways and trade networks that were providing these exotic trade goods all the way into our region, some from huge distances. If those copper artifacts prove geochemically to have come from the Keweenaw Peninsula area, from the mines up there, you're talking about like 2,000 miles of how these things traveled to get here. So, and probably traded maybe over decades, if not centuries, from down the line from one to another till it ultimately got to Southeast Texas. Who knows? Unfortunately, the artifacts don't speak, but they have provided us with a great deal of new information. So thank you very much. If anyone has questions, they should type them into to our coordinator there, Dr. Liz, and I will try to answer them.
Thank you, Dub. That was fantastic. So yeah, folks, if you have a question, if you go down to the group chat, and type your question in, it'll come straight to us. And we'll give you a few minutes to get those typed in. Well, we've got some comments coming in, Dub. Okay. Jimmy Barrera says, "Great talk, thank you." Thanks for coming to the show, Jimmy. And then Ms. Inman says, "Great presentation. She might be biased though."
Yes, that young lady and I have become extremely good friends over the last 3 years, and shared not only archaeology, but each other's flood stories from the storms we have gotten over the last couple of years. But let me make this one comment. If every director of a facility was as cooperative with archaeologists doing research as Alana has been, our research across the country would be a much greater position. She has been just fantastic to work with. You're supposed to
Okay.
turn
Mike's got a question, and his question is, would the Trinity River itself have helped with the trade of these artifacts as well as the trade routes?
It very well could have, Mike. One of the interesting things is we don't have, there are Dalton points in the collection, but we haven't found a Dalton adze. But in the early Archaic, we have a number of clear fork gouges, which were known to be woodworking tools. There is also woodworking tools made out of petrified wood in the late Archaic and the late Prehistoric. So we know these people had the ability and they were near to the Trinity. Of course, wood preservation is virtually non-existent. And so we don't have the proof of the boats per se, but these people had to have traveled up and down the Trinity corridor using water trade as well. Yes.
Okay, a couple more questions. All right, so some folks questions kind of along the same line, so I'm going to kind of synthesize as best I can. But folks are very interested in your theories about what the indigenous people in this area were trading for the exotic goods that you found.
Well, like I said, this is a thing that I faced when I was, my colleague Mark Houston and I, who worked 40 years of trying to define the late prehistoric along the East Fork up there by Dallas. We went to the same problem, and we actually came to the solution that area had some of the original stands of bodark trees in Texas. So we came to the conclusion, and we found specific woodworking tools too that had wear patterns the same as we had done experimentally on green bodark wood, that they were trading that for staves of bows. The people down here in South Texas, there was no bodark back then. So, you really look at the resources. You've got gravel chert, which is in very small little cobbles, and you've got quartzite, and you've got silicified petrified wood. Nobody would have wanted that toolstone. They didn't have exotic things like bison to be able to trade for robes or things like that. They had white-tailed deer. Well, everybody in the country has white-tailed deer, so why would anybody have been interested in that? There were no mines here. There was nothing else. Maybe going down to the Gulf and trading for salt. That could be a possibility. But the most common things that we have all kinds of ethnographic references to was the consistent trading of wives. So, probably I would say salter wives would be the answer off the top of my head. Yeah.
Hopefully not salty wives.
Well, maybe
Sorry.
some. Who knows?
We'll cut that out later. Okay. Dan's got a question / comment. Trade items at the Bowser site included marine shell ornaments. Maybe those were dissolved away at Liberty.
Yeah, we have. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, there's more. So BUSYCON ornaments. Bizicon ornaments at Bowser and at Allen's Creek are identical to those at Glacial Cairns and in Adena sites in Ohio.
Yeah.
Valley and along the Great Lakes. Pendants and medallions out of lightning whelk.
Right.
That is his comment.
We have to date, there's a few amount of shells that have been found. Most of them are in a condition to the point that they'll have the consistency like chalk. They almost come apart in your hand. But most of them, if not all of them, that I have seen in the collection are very common freshwater mussels that you would have found in the Trinity and its tributaries. There has been no exotic shell, no carved shells, no gorgets or anything like that found in Southeast Texas from the collection that I'm aware of.
All right, anyone else with questions before we wrap it up? Well, if they do, we will email them to you later, Deb.
Okay.
Jason made a comment. Oh, here's it is, a late breaking comment. People were coming from the east to hunt bison.
Yeah. And although we have no evidence of bison being this far, you know, down over to this area, there is a bison bone that was found in a pimple mound site down by the community of Highlands. But there is not a, well, I take it back. There's one bison bone with a spiral fracture in it from Wood Springs, but it looks like it's a paleo bison, not something in the archaic or late prehistoric time periods, because it's there with other Pleistocene mammal bones from that one site where the Clovis material is.
Let's see, he had more to his comment too. Something about most of the exotics in Southeast Texas date to the Pottery Point era.
Yeah.
As a
So it would have been the late Archaic, and in these three sites in particular, while they have occupations from everything from Paleoindian to late prehistoric, the late Archaic and the Woodland period, which is the phase in kind of between Archaic and to the late prehistoric, those two time periods are the hugest component of the artifacts. So they must have had some of the biggest populations during those time periods.
Oh, he added more. They weren't hunting in Liberty. It was a way point on the way to the prairies to the west. Okay,
Sure.
he added a little more there.
Sure, of course.
Okay, well, Linda asked to be unmuted, so I said, well, you're president, we'll allow that. So
Doug, that was just a
turn it over to
terrific
Linda.
talk. A terrific talk. Thank you so very much. And when we get back to Liberty County, more people can come up and help us work. Thanks to Alana. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that next month we'll be meeting via Zoom unless things change drastically on October 15th. And our speaker will be Dr. Greg Dimmick. And this is a really cool talk he's going to give. He's going to talk about his 2 weeks of excavating at the Vindolanda Fort on Hadrian's Wall in England. So it should be a really, really interesting presentation. And then in November, we get Amy Borgens, who's going to talk about marine archaeology in Texas. So we've got two more exciting meetings coming up. And Dub, you just set the bar. Thank you so much.
Entirely welcome.
Okay.
I enjoy it.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you out at the Lone Oak site. Thanks for hosting, Liz.
No problem. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.